All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here tonight. My name is Mitch Boersma. I'm the Director of Operations here at the CIC. On behalf of Father Charles and the whole team here, we're grateful to have all of you here tonight in person and those of you joining us on the live stream. We're here tonight to celebrate the launch of Tim Carney's latest book, Family Unfriendly, How Our Culture Made Raising Kids Much Harder Than It Needs to Be. For those of you who were here with us last week at the book launch of Hannah's Children by Catherine Pekalik, our discussion tonight is something of a continuation of a lot of those themes on how culture can and should support robust family life. A more efficient organization might have smashed those two events together, but we really wanted to give each book its own due because it really is important in our culture right now to be talking about this issue. It also gives me a chance to do something I forgot to do last week and set the stage by invoking the wisdom of the most important mother of many children in my life, my wife, Rosie. We're headed to Dulles Airport tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. to bring our 5 kids to Colorado for Easter, so pray for us. As we're dragging all of these kids through the airport in the morning, we're inevitably going to get one of those who, what, why questions of like, why do you have all these kids? Like, what is going on here? Rosie's stock response to this now is great. She says, at 4 kids, everyone knows you love each other, but at 5 kids, everyone knows you love Jesus. And it's a great answer. I don't know how it's going to change when baby 6 shows up in November. It'll probably be something like, my grandmother used to say, which was not quite as kind. She would say, I wanted, when people would ask her if she wanted, she had 7 children. She said, I have 7 children because I did not want 8. And that might be the way things go. But really, in any case, it's moments like this that are the precise reason why we're all so grateful to Tim for writing this book. It gives language to what many of us know to be true, that having and raising children, even a lot of children, is not only feasible and not only necessary, but ultimately good. Tim is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and columnist at the Washington Examiner. He and his wife, Katie, who's here with us tonight, have raised their family in Maryland, then wised up and came over to Northern Virginia. The book is called Family Unfriendly, How Our Culture Made Raising Kids Much Harder Than It Needs to Be. Please join me in welcoming Tim Carney.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, folks, for coming. This really is great. So many familiar faces, especially thanks to my father-in-law, my son, and my wife, Katie, for coming. Also, 20 years ago next month in this same building was where I came into the Catholic Church. I received my first communion and confirmation approximately here, trying to figure out the exact lay of the land. So thank you. And this book absolutely was a labor of love, and it was in part, and a lot of the idea came from Katie. So I will start with our first day as parents. And when we look at that picture, Katie says, why did they let us take a baby home when we were babies ourselves? And that was sort of how we felt. And the very beginning, that whole day, I remember all the moments. And the one I talk about in the book was when Katie was sleeping, and there was this makeshift nursery in the hallway. And I'm just standing and staring down, and I walk out, and that's where Lucy is, and I'm staring down at this perfect little face. And just thinking, is she going to be a big sister to a lot of kids? What's she going to look like as a toddler? What will she grow up into be? And that was when the nurse tapped me on the shoulder and said, sir, your baby is 2 bassinets over. You're currently just staring at somebody else's child. But the reason we were in an overflow nursery was because at that time, there was a little baby boom in 2006. Everybody was having babies. Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, they had their baby Suri. Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. When I talk to younger crowds, I can't say Heidi Klum and Seal because nobody knows who they are, but this audience might know who Heidi Klum and Seal are. Britney Spears had a baby. The number of babies born in 2006 and 2007 set records. In fact, it was called a baby boomlet, the highest number of babies born in U.S. history. And at the time, again, Britney had a baby about the same time we did, the millennials, which was a much larger generation than Gen X, was coming onto the scene. They were turning prime childbearing years, so there should have been a baby boom, and there wasn't. Instead, we got a baby bust. 4.3 million babies born in 2007, down to 3.6 million in 2020. Little up and down. The numbers for 2023 look like they're actually going to be lower than even the pandemic year. So think about that. This is a baby bust. The total fertility rate is a birth rate you normally hear. The red line is the replacement level of 2.1. That's 2.1 babies per woman. We peaked above that briefly in that baby boomlet. We're now down below 1.7. So why should we care about it? When you talk about this sort of thing, especially on like Twitter, people accuse you of being like a Handmaid's Tale guy or some sort of creep or a white nationalist. I get that one a lot. So I give reasons, starting with the economic and going to what I think are the more important. When we have more, the dependency ratio, when we have more retirees and fewer workers, that's bad. Number two, women actually still do want babies. Number three, the baby bust reflects something unwell about our culture. And this is the most important part. This really is, and we'll get to that later. But also, babies are good, is one of the things that I try to argue. Dependency ratio, I'll go through the economic stuff pretty quickly. Normally, this is called an age pyramid. So the taller bars are people who are in their 90s. The bottom is people under 5. You see ours is like an age onion. And now we have more Americans in their 60s than we do under age 10. So we have a shortage of children. We have fewer children now than we did at the last census. So already, even before the baby bust hits the working age population, we have a flatlining working age population. So we will, in 20 years, have fewer and fewer people who theoretically could be working while we have more retirees than ever. We have an economist here, and we definitely can, you guys can imagine the problems. A quick quote I give is, neither private savings nor government pension schemes work unless there are enough workers to meet the needs of older Americans. You might save up $10 million in retirement, but if there's nobody to answer the call when you call for your leaky windows or roof, it's not worth anything. Number two, women still want kids. The ideal number of kids for a family hasn't gone down since the 1990s. It's gone slightly up. 2.7. When people are asked, what is the ideal number of kids? They say 2.7. And again, we're getting 1.6 to 1.7. There is a problem that Gen Z right now shows signs. So the people coming out of high school, in college, that they're showing signs that they actually don't want kids. So the millennial problem is they want kids and they're not having them. The Gen Z problem might be worse. So we should talk about that later. So, but if we do want more kids, why aren't we having them? So there's a story I tell of, I traveled to Utah. Obviously, they're relatively fecund in Utah. And I went to this neighborhood called the Lower Avenues, which it seems like a great place to raise kids. I walked around, I didn't see anybody with kids. And so finally I run into this couple, Isaac and Nicole, millennials. I say, hey, I'm writing about kids in Utah. They say, well, we don't want kids. I say, why not? Say, well, we can't afford it. What's unaffordable? And Isaac says, everything, healthcare. But if I'm being honest, I'm just selfish. Some people, Nicole and I always say, some people are going to be watching Teletubbies and cleaning up vomit, and we are going to be drinking margaritas in Paris. And at that moment, I joke you not, a woman walked up with a double stroller, and in each compartment was a chihuahua. So I walked away with my mind reeling, A, that this seemed like a scene from Children of Men, the P.D. James book. B, why would you go to Paris to drink margaritas? But also C, those arguments that they gave, affordability and selfishness. Those are the common arguments you hear for why young people don't have babies. I posit, and it's in the subtitle of my book, that it's a cultural problem that we're facing. So why is it not economic? First of all, we had a lot more babies during the Great Recession than we're having now. So economy got better, birth rate got worse. Number two, I point in the book to studies. Here's one particularly, Melissa Carney, spells her name different. She recently wrote a book defending the idea that married parents are good. But before that, she did a study that said, okay, I'm going to show how when the cost of childcare goes up, how does that affect birth rates? When student debt goes up, how does that affect birth rates? On a state-by-state level, increase in rent, student debt, childcare costs, almost any economic predictor did not correlate with a localized collapse in birth rates. And so there I cite a liberal journalist saying, well, this just tells us that, surprise, surprise, younger women might just want more out of life than children. So that's, here's another economic point. Those lines are the wealth at a given age of the different generations, and the bottom line is it looks like millennials are exactly as wealthy as Gen X and probably more wealthy than boomers, and yet they have fewer kids. So what about selfishness? I don't have a chart for selfishness, but if I did, it would be at 0 until Adam and Eve eat the fruit, and then it goes up to 100 and it's flat since then. I do not think that we are more selfish. I think blaming selfishness for anything, any phenomenon, a change in the birth rates, for instance, is like blaming gravity for an increased number of plane crashes. It's a constant force. But you might say, well, some people, some civilizations seem more selfish than others. And maybe this is me being a philosopher or a sophist or whatever, but I think the selfishness is steady. What changes is how much society and culture is offsetting that selfishness, is steering people's self-interest towards the common good, steering people's long-term interests towards their short-term actions towards their long-term interests. That's what a culture does. That's what a society does. And so that's where I think we are failing. A final data point pointing to culture, those blue bars are the birth rate of all the countries in the OECD, basically all the wealthy countries. There's one outlier. It's not the wealthiest country. It's not the poorest country. It's not the best educated country. It's not the worst educated country. It's not the country with the highest welfare state. It's Israel, which is middle of the road on all of those other counts. Except on culture, they're extraordinary. Also, the baby bust reflects something unwell about our culture. So the first couple chapters, and this is most of what I've ended up talking to like podcast hosts about, are about parenting culture. Since 1975, the dads now spend twice as much time, according to time use surveys, on just parenting. So this doesn't count like cooking for the family, because you're also cooking for yourself. It would count like driving your kid just to school or just sitting down and working on homework. So this doesn't count all the multitasking. But so fathers have doubled the amount of time that they're putting in. Women are working outside the home a lot more. Families are much smaller, and yet somehow mothers have increased by 50% the amount of time per week that they're spending on just parenting, and likewise with the multitasking parenting. So parenting has become much more intensive somehow. And there's a philosophy behind it. It's called the quality over quantity mindset that the modern people have chosen. A lot of people in this room did not choose quality, I guess, is the implication by that. You guys have top quality kids. Steve, thank you. But Isabel Sawhill, who's a scholar at Brookings, she praises the low birth rates. With fewer children to support, parents and society can both invest more in each child, helping them to climb the ladder and become productive citizens. So the view is fewer kids, more investment by parent in each kid, the better off it is. It's not true. The Journal of Pediatrics says that the rise in mental health disorders, the epidemic of childhood anxiety is because they don't get to run around, because they have too much parental supervision, too much adult supervision, too much scheduling. In the book, I talk about how youth sports gave way to expensive, intensive travel sports where people forget the point of youth sports and how this can destroy child culture, that you end up at a field hockey tournament in Delaware every weekend. It doesn't. One day I'm going to do a radio show in Delaware and they're going to get upset by that. So I'll say in North Carolina every weekend. I've had multiple dads say to me, I wish that I set my family schedule, but the swim coach sets my family schedule. And in addition to the harms on children where they have a lower self-estimation, they're more stressed out if they're specializing, physically it's bad for them to not cross-train. Am I right about that, Russ? Yes. So then helicopter parenting and safetyism. Here I quote Katie when I do something more free range, and she says, I'm not afraid of kidnappers, Tim. I'm afraid of child protective services. This was more true when we were in Montgomery County, where they really did arrest free range parents in Montgomery County. But also in Montgomery County, there was a debate over whether to put a sidewalk in this one neighborhood on the walk to school. And one woman said, you'll kill my cherry trees if you put in a sidewalk. And so then one parent said, but my kids have to walk in the road now. I want them to be able to walk on the sidewalk. And her response was, little kids like this shouldn't be walking to school by themselves anyway. And so you see what parents are up against, where they have to drive their kids everywhere. So what we need This is chapter 3, title is If You Want Fecundity in the Sheets, You Need Walkability in the Streets. Setting kids free would make parenting life much easier, would make kids a lot more stressed. Right now, kids are much less likely to walk to school, much less likely to walk anywhere. And so we live in this world where if you have to do anything, you have to take your little kids with you. You're buckling them, unbuckling them, rebuckling them. You're reaching into that like slurry of like chewed up goldfish and toddler butt sweat underneath that diaper to grab the buckle. And that's just like step one of the whole process. It makes parenting a drag. And the child seat mandates, the car seat mandates have been proven to be contraceptive, to stop people from having a third kid. Another cultural issue, modern dating. I spend more time on this specifically when I am talking to college kids, because the dating culture really is broken in a lot of ways. Louise Perry is a feminist writer, more conservative, and she says, today's sexual culture prefers to understand people as freewheeling, atomized individuals, all looking out for number one and all up for a good time. It assumes without sexual taboos, we would be liberated, capable of making entirely free choices. And so this, I think, where we get to the sexual revolution and the pill, this is where I go in the later chapters. After I've baited in the readers by talking about travel sports being crazy, I try to say how our culture has really been affected in the last 60 years. So Janet Yellen, actually, and George Akerlof wrote a paper about the sexual revolution, how it's led to more single moms. Shouldn't the birth control pill and abortion mean there's fewer women who are raising kids without a mate? If she's not willing to have an abortion or use contraception, the man can reason, why should I sacrifice myself to get married? By making the birth of a child the physical choice of the mother, the sexual revolution has made marriage and child support a social choice of the father. What I argue in this book, sorry, I'm going to steal the display copy because I forgot to bring it up here. What I argue in this book is that attitude they give to the deadbeat dad, that's the culture, that's the attitude of our broader culture. It was your decision to have kids. And having kids is so chosen, it's postponed, it's agonized over, it's planned intricately. It's part of intentional living. It was your decision to have kids, it's your problem. And that's tied to basically an anti-human mindset, I argue. I start by quoting Paul Ehrlich. It was one stinking hot night in Delhi when he first felt the threat of overpopulation. In a taxi cab with his wife and daughter, Ehrlich was appalled that Delhi's, quote, streets seemed alive with people. People eating, people washing, people sleeping, people visiting, arguing and screaming, people thrusting their hands through the taxi window begging, people defecating and urinating, people clinging to buses, people hurting animals, people. So when Paul Ehrlich wanted to write about why he was afraid of, when he was writing his image of hell, it was people. And I argue that while he's not taken seriously in 90% of the world, except by, I guess, 60 Minutes had him on, the modern mindset that demands independence above all else also demands control and thus abhors whatever seems to have a life of its own. The inert is much more manageable, more fit for rational arrangement, for planning. This is increasingly the worldview of the wealthy West, and the philosophical shift makes our culture discordant with the realities of human life. Human life has always been stinking hot, in Ehrlich's words. It is inevitably chaotic. We adults can engineer for ourselves some modicum of control, some illusion of cleanliness, sterility, and predictability. But once a baby enters the picture, the illusion ends. With the baby comes all that dreaded eating, washing, sleeping, defecating, urinating. What's more, because it takes a village to raise a child, your baby makes you dependent on other adults, which means visiting, arguing, screaming. People. And the sterility is it poisons the modern mind, and it makes us believe that we can plan our life, we can remove risk, that we can conquer biology with chemistry. And so that's what a lot of the reproductive technology and the surrogacy and the IVF is about, is saying, okay, what if I want to conquer biology with chemistry, but I still want a kid? but also more it's an attitude that gets in the way of any sort of relationship, because any actual relationship that involves commitment and isn't just always transactional, that is lasting, well, that strips you of some of your autonomy. And that I talked to multiple young women who told me that they don't want to get married because if they get married and have kids, having kids, they'll inevitably lose some job skills. And then if their husband leaves them or if their marriage falls apart, then they're out of luck. So they build their life around this sort of almost financial insurance product, which is always having my career at the top it could be. And that's about wanting sort of a sterile, clean life. A mindset that I think showed up during COVID. So one more passage. Human wisdom, as Socrates. Oh wait, sorry, I skipped the most important part. I can't find it here, but I'll just say when somebody asked us, Katie and I, if we had a birth plan, she said, "Yes, but I don't expect we'll stick to it." And I then quoted, here I was quoting Socrates, but I quoted Mike Tyson, who said, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." Becoming a parent is getting punched in the face every day. And human wisdom, as Socrates and Tyson explained, is knowing the limits of your own knowledge and your own planning. Human happiness, likewise, is grounded in the unexpected and the unplanned. One reason we loved college and one reason people love living in walkable, park-filled, neighborly places is a constant appearance of the unplanned. It's the serendipitous encounters that make our lives rich. But this is antithetical to the scientific, hyper-rational, planner mindset that is characteristic of modernity. Nothing provides more serendipity, more unexpected friendly encounters than adding roommates to your life who will stick around for 18 or more years. And these roommates are essentially unchosen. Sure, you may have planned a child, but you didn't get to choose this child. A kid isn't like a soulmate you choose or a best friend you elected to move in with. You don't assemble your family the way LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade assembled the 2010 Miami Heat. Your kid is more like the way we got a freshman roommate in my day, randomly assigned to you by some higher up. One of our weirdest experiences as parents was our first moment as parents. I had been prepared for Katie's pain in labor and delivery. I had been prepared for the unreal quantity of blood involved in this ordeal, but I wasn't prepared for the first time seeing my daughter's face, and neither was Katie. "Tim," Katie shouted in disbelief when the doctor handed her Lucy. Tim, what's going on?" was the tone in her voice as her eyes became huge, almost in panic. "What do we do now?" I was having the same exact feelings. We had named Lucy 7 months earlier, the moment we found out she was a girl. Lucy is my mother's name and my mother's mother's name and her mother's name before that. I had planned since childhood to name her Lucy. Katie and I had sung lullabies and Irish rebel songs to her in utero. We had set up her nursery. We already found her some friends because Katie's sisters and childhood pals were pregnant at the same time. But after all these months of preparing for her, Lucy entered that labor and delivery room, and I had the strangest reaction. Who is this person? I've never seen her before. This girl was supposed to be part of our family, but she was a total stranger. 7 hours later, when I mistook her for another baby in the nursery, it was understandable because we'd only met once before. So just quickly to expand on the sterility issue, again, this is a quote from Stephanie Murray. "Children are a personal choice nowadays, and therefore a personal problem. Have as many as you want, make sure they don't bother the rest of us." In opposing a tax credit for parents, Ron Johnson said, "People decide to have families and become parents. This cost is something they need to consider when they make that choice. I've never really felt there's society's responsibility to take care of other people's children." I've got some Miley Cyrus in here that I'll skip over. This was an op-ed when I was a kid. "No problem facing the earth looms larger than the growth of the reproductive rate of the human species. Virtually all human suffering can be attributed to a population that is too numerous for our planet." And you like that image where we're all breeding like bunny rabbits. So those rabbits are then devouring the earth, which is a cabbage. The author wasn't just saying that overpopulation is bad. He's saying we need to teach kids that babies are bad. He was the principal of the John Pettibone School, a public school in New Milford, an elementary school. The John Pettibone School closed in 2014 for low and falling enrollment. When I went there the other day, a couple years ago, there was a dog park there and gentle adult yoga. So maybe Principal Burley really did have success. Tied to the sterility is a sadness. This sadness that we aren't good, that we're destroying the planet. We're basically rabbits devouring a cabbage. And the sadness shows up in all sorts of ways. Looking ahead, do you think your life overall will be better? Americans used to mostly say yes, and now they mostly say no. Tellingly, liberals were more likely to say no, and it didn't really change. At first, I thought that was like a Trump phenomenon, but it didn't really change when Biden came in. The future will be worse off than it is now. Ezra Klein had a good view about the people who say they're worried about climate change destroying the planet. He's saying in wealthy countries, we're basically going to be fine. We're going to adapt. That fear, people literally come up to Ezra Klein and say, can I really have a baby within this burning planet? Which is itself a sad thing. But he said that fear is really a guilt. They feel guilty for what wealthy people have done to the planet. I argue that the climate guilt is a totem for a deeper guilt. Again, Miley Cyrus said, we don't want to reproduce because we know the earth can't handle it. It meaning humans, meaning babies, can't handle us. Humans are bad. I think that is one of the key factors here. I call it civilizational sadness. I was on a trivia team full of strangers at a place called the Ruddy Duck Tavern once. And when I said I have 6 kids, this woman on my team said, oh, that sounds terrible. And so then we started talking. She has a good job. She has a husband she loves, but definitely doesn't want kids. She started describing why not. She started talking about litter. She started talking about how she has friends who have disabled children or kids who just still wet their bed at age 8. This talk of filth and disability and unpredictability, that she wanted to be able to plan her life and children didn't allow it. So I said, well, what's your opinion sort of on like humans in general? And she said, in general, do I think we're good? No, I think we're the cancer of the earth. So at about the time I was finishing up the book, there's a joke on Twitter where you say, I spent years working on this book and he just tweeted it out. The Pope kind of just tweeted it out. He said, birth rates and a welcoming attitude reveal how much happiness is present in a society. When unhappy society is reduced to a group of individuals defending what they have at all costs. So I think in America right now, we have an increasing zero-sum mentality, and that is both a cause and an effect of our falling birth rate. I think civilizational sadness is a cause of our baby bust that's not being appreciated by other people. That would be one thing I would want to get out about this book, is that, again, one reason this is happening, it's not mostly economic. It's mostly about the fact that we look at ourselves and we don't think we're good. When did we think we were good? When our men got off the boat in 1945 and our women were waiting for them on the dock. The men just defeated 2 evil empires and the women had just kept the economy going for 4 years. They smooch on the pier, they go to the chapel, get married, have a ton of babies. The baby boom was not simply a makeup for babies that didn't happen during the war. It was an unprecedented thing that demographers thought could never happen, a generation-long rise in the birth rates. Because never before, never since, have we been so sure that we were good as at that moment. Europe didn't really have a baby boom. Germany, Japan, and Italy were the leaders in the baby bust in the second half of the last century. And that was one of the things that really brought this home for me. I heard somebody say, there's something about losing a world war that dampens your desire to make more of you. I think that mindset has now creeped into all of the West, all of Europe and the US, and in different ways in Asia. But I think it is a common thread that connects those cultures. In a lot of audiences, I spend a lot of time arguing that people are good. And this is sort of the materialistic argument, that there's a lot fewer people in dire poverty and that something had to cause that. It probably wasn't climate change. It probably wasn't Google Gemini. It probably wasn't space aliens. It must have been that humans are making human life better. That's obviously not the most interesting or true argument for why people are good. We're good because we're made in the image of God and God loves us. We know we're fallen, but that idea that we're fallen, I think that is clear to our culture. The idea that we are loved and that we can be redeemed, I think that's what's rejected. And that and the culture of sterility are the two underappreciated causes for why we're not having babies. But again, to end on this one, so it's a little bit old. You can see I'm still taller in that picture than Charlie. But that actually people are good. And you guys are good for coming here tonight. Thank you.
For Q&A, Angela,
Tim, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah. I have a couple questions. The first question kind of on the economic side. So the question is, you see that, the excuse that for not having more children of a lot of couples is, daycare costs and, loss of income from maybe one parent has to stay home and all that. But you mentioned that that's not determined. That's probably not the real issue. Their issue is more cultural. So, what would you say to a couple who thinks this is the issue, right? And you say it's not really supported by data. And then the other question is, I encounter myself whenever I'm not hanging out in Catholic circles with a lot of men who are young. Maybe they're in their late 30s or their early 40s, and they get sterilized. They get vasectomies. It's a very common thing. Like what's happening? Like, is this? Do you have any info on that or research on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime. So on the first one, I don't know. I think we just have to say nobody's ever ready to have kids. People were having kids when they were much poorer before. Now, the way in which young people today really do have something to object to is very true in the last 3 years, not over the last 15 years, but the last 3 years, housing. And so when you look at the studies about affordability and costs, that's the one, the inability to buy a little starter home or something like that. That really does deter people from having kids. And so that is when people ask for policy solutions, I would say build as many houses as you possibly can. Get rid of the regulations that stop people from building starter homes, et cetera. But that in general, the people think raising kids is more expensive than it is, in part because the one tweet I remember from this liberal journalist, got married, they're expecting their first kid about a few weeks before the baby's born. He had this post on Twitter in 2 parts. Part 1 was researches the costs of a night nurse, somebody to stay up with your baby. Part 2, researches how to start a socialist revolution. The only way he could imagine caring for his baby was the market or the state. The idea that there's a third thing, something in between, family, neighbors, community, your boss helping you out by letting you sleep in or whatever. It didn't occur to him. And I think, and that's what I argued in my last book, Alienated America, I think a lot of the young people in America today just don't even think of civil society. They don't think of neighbors. And you will see lots of articles. There's this one columnist I quote repeatedly from the Washington Post who says in multiple occasions, like, I'm going to be forced to mooch childcare from my mother-in-law. So that's how she considers the fact that her mother-in-law sometimes looks after her own grandbaby. She's mooching childcare because, and again, while she's on the left, she still has this very market-oriented mindset that everything should be a transaction rather than like a relation that you just count on. So it's not an easy thing to change somebody's mind on them. On the sterilization, one of the interesting things I found and that I include in the book is the language of sterilization really did kind of treat pregnancy and the risk of pregnancy as an illness. It sounded exactly like the talk about COVID. One guy said, this is basically like a vaccine passport. I mean, I guess it was like a sex with his wife passport or something, but he said it was he used the term vaccine passport to describe the sense of relief he got from doing it. So I do think that that image that sterility is safety really has sunk into people's minds in ways that didn't necessarily even start with fertility and baby making, but it has crept into that.
Next question.
Curious about some of the international stuff. You showed one chart with Israel out as an outlier there, and those were among developed nations. Also, I guess the nations not shown there, the developing world, kind of wondering about that. And how does, if these things are cultural, then how broad-based are these cultural effects, especially internationally?
So poorer countries tend to have more kids, obviously, than the wealthier countries. Generally, it's going down. Interestingly, the top 3 sources of immigration into the U.S. are all below replacement level. And that's Mexico, India, and China. In numbers, we get more from those 3 than from any other, and they're all below 2.1. Mexico sometimes flirts with that line. But India dropping below 2.1 was shocking. And they dropped below it at a stage far earlier in their development than other countries did. So the cultural differences between, if you're in Southern Europe and you have a baby, nobody's gonna frown at you. You're gonna have all these would-be grandmas all running up and trying to like grab your baby and kiss you, right? If you're in Asia, in South Korea, on the other hand, where they have the lowest birth rate, there's multiple articles I've read just in the last 2 months about the no babies allowed, no kids allowed sign, because so their culture is very much. If you've ever seen in the U.S., we have this when people get on an airplane and they feel the need with their baby to bring the little baggie of like earplugs and drink tickets, as if they're bringing like a stinky fish meal onto the plane. They feel bad about it. That's much stronger in those places. In Northern Europe, I think the cultural problem is the workism, and in the U.S. too, people placing work in the place of God and family. And so that's why I found myself landing on the sadness as a common cultural thread between all of these. That there's the sadness of us not being good in different ways has trickled into those different cultures.
Thank you. Tim, I'll say I'm on page 3 of your book right now. So
Thank you.
I just started it before coming down here, so I'm really looking forward to reading it. But during your talk, a lot of things were going through my head. And one of the things that occurred to me was that one problem could be a lack of sort of models of joyful success in raising a family. And, younger couples, many of them may, we want instant gratification, and they don't, and if they don't see that as a potential goal, they see, boy, I could be really joyful at the end of this ride,
Yeah.
and but they're not willing to make that investment that they have to make today. I would never tell I have 8 children, as you know. And I would never tell a young couple, it's a piece of cake. It's easy. It's hard work. It's really hard work, and you're going to go through years of not being able to pay all your bills and all of that sort of thing, right? But it's worth it. It's worth that investment to get to that point of joyful success.
That's exactly what I say on page 4, Steve. No. No, I think your point of the models is exactly right. So social media shows 2 different models of motherhood when I researched the mamasphere. One was the picture perfect things. Either you're a ballerina who lives on a farm and makes grilled cheese sandwiches from scratch starting in the morning for your kid. And so, this is directed at women, but I conducted a focus group, and there was these guys who said, I don't want to be a parent when I can give my kids the bare minimum. I want to give them the best of everything. And I thought, we don't give our kids the best of everything. We give them the best of what matters. And we gave them the best possible piano teacher who just happened to like live 3 blocks away and cost 40. I mean, I actually used the piano teacher as an example. It's like the best was somebody who we knew and we could get there easily and would do it in our house. And like we didn't hire a professional. Once we did accidentally sign up for the best ballet program, but that's another story. But so you've got the best of everything images. And then the other model is the parenting is a total nightmare. That's a huge genre on social media. And sometimes there's this one video I cite that's trying to like make moms sound like, make people appreciate their moms more. But it's like, we're hiring for a job. It's about 168 hours a week. You never get to sit down. You don't get to eat. And it's like, yeah, it's good to tell people how hard their moms work, but like, moms sit down. Every mom I know gets to sit down. But so those things. And then when you throw in the fact that there's a big problem that all of this is self-reinforcing, that smaller families lead to smaller families, that so many of us are blessed to live in a place where we see everything. We see families slightly older. We see big families. We see people having parties like all the time. And that's our image of a big, joyful family. The less there is of that, the less there's that image. But the joke I have, and any of you who have heard me talk about this book or were at the Heights Gala on Saturday heard this joke, but it's not a joke. It's true. It's that all of these things I argue about why parenting should be easier than it is, but no matter what, it's going to be the hardest thing you ever do. But it's the easiest path if where you're trying to get is somewhere noble enough. It's the easiest path to being a man or a woman of virtue. I think marriage and parenthood is the easy road to sainthood. Because the Bible says to feed the hungry and clothe the naked, and we wake up in the morning as parents, and there are hungry, naked people in our house. They're right there for us. It's like, here you are.
Great. We have one question here, and then we can take one more afterwards.
Thank you, Tim. A tour de force.
Thank you.
So you're probably familiar with Pat Fagan?
Yes.
Okay, so Pat Fagan some years ago, when speaking about the illegitimacy rates, showed that 25, 40 years ago, black population was way ahead of the white population, but the white population was just 20 years behind. And it was getting worse and worse and worse. And one of the worst things about this is that the father's not in the home. The children don't see a normal functioning 2-parent family. And he said those children are ill-equipped to become parents in the future. They don't learn the skills. I wonder if you have any comments on that.
So there's a lot of things they don't learn. And this gets at the trickiness of policy. So typically in this town, people say, what about a tax credit? What about this? What about that? The danger, so within our halls at American Enterprise Institute, there's lots of different opinions. And one of the big problems with giving a ton of government support to parents who are in need is a lot of times that means you're subsidizing a single mom, which I have no problem in, we're supposed to feed the hungry, right? But in a way that history shows deters marriage. So then these programs end up depriving the kids of a father, a male role model, depriving the kids of an image of marriage, but also depriving the kids of a working parent. And so that really is the definition of intergenerational poverty, is you don't have an image that like that's what you do as an adult is work, in addition to what you're talking about. So the birth control pill, I think, helped lead to the more illegitimate babies because of all the reasons everybody in this room knows about it: divorce, sex, love, marriage, and having babies from one another. And then children of divorce, whether it's, middle-class couples or children who grow up as an only child, the idea of fatherhood particularly doesn't appeal to them. Women, so there was this one experiment where they tried to teach high school girls to not get pregnant by giving them these little robot babies that they had to feed. And it was like, it took up all their time. It was really needy. It backfired. They found that these 17-year-olds kind of liked the sense of value that they got. So I think the problem really affects the boys who don't see fatherhood as a desirable thing.
Hey, Tim. So two questions. One, I think you kind of focused on the U.S. as a whole. Are there, there pockets that are
Yeah.
more or less family unfriendly, as you would put it? And the second one being is, what do you think are steps that could be taken to change the tide here?
Yeah, so as a journalist, I tend to focus on the negative, and then as a think tank guy, I'm supposed to talk about the positive. So first of all, yes, the places that show up on a map as more family friendly in a few ways: higher birth rate, less childhood anxiety, are places that are very religious. Start with Mormon, like the middle class suburbs around Salt Lake City. Happier kids, less drug abuse, higher birth rates, bigger families, more marriage. And the Dutch reform that I wrote a lot about in my last book, they show up on a map with all those same good outcomes. Right next door to where we used to live in Silver Spring is Kemp Mill, a modern Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. Same sort of thing. Marriage, walkability, bigger families, fewer travel sports. And so the upper class in the U.S., and this is said a lot by conservative scholars, do tend to, even though they'll vote more liberal, do tend to practice what we preach. They get married, they stay involved in their kids' lives, etc. But they're not having more than 2 kids, and they're not instilling in their kids a desire to have more kids. So I call it sort of an infertile virtue that they're practicing. So really, I would love, and I've said this on the podcast, somebody find for me a non-tiny, a fairly large community that is pro-family, that is family-friendly, where people have a significant birth rate that's even above 2.1. That's not religious. I don't think it exists. Is there a second question you asked?
It's just kind of if there are any
steps well, so
change the tide here.
that's the SEP is a great awakening, right? Fasting and prayer. There are policies that I talk about. I think if you build more sidewalks, better crosswalks, and better playgrounds, you get the kid walkability. That will help. I think things that make housing more expensive, if you fix those, then that will help. But mostly it's going to be shifting the culture. And so for me, that means I'm going to start going to colleges after Easter and telling people, and telling law students particularly, your family is more important than your job. And it always will be. And anybody you talk to who's lived long enough will tell you the same thing, to try to drive that message home.
Please join me in thanking Tim.
The book will be